Blobel was one of the 24 defendants at the Einsatzgruppen Trial from the 15th of September 1947 to the 10th of April 1948. This was the 9th of the 12 follow-up Nuremberg trials. In contrast to the main war criminals trial, the Einsatzgruppen Trial took place before an American military court, known as the Nuremberg Military Tribunal, or the NMT, and there was no four-power control. Officially, the case was dubbed the United States of America against Otto Ohlendorf, Ohlendorf being deemed the most important SS officer in the dock. At the trial, it was the contention of the prosecution that SS Colonel Paul Blobel commanded Sonderkommando 4A from June 1941 to January 1942, and in that capacity he was responsible for the killing of 60,000 people. The defense counsel in its final plea argued that the maximum number of persons executed by Sonderkommando 4A cannot have exceeded 10 to 15,000, as though somehow that made everything all right. The defense claimed that the reports which chronicled the 60,000 killings were subject to error using a number of rather weak excuses, which, were this not a very serious matter, might actually sound quite amusing. The first excuse was that, as the reports were not made under oath and that they were made by an officer unfamiliar with the subject covered in the reports, that, therefore, they could not be believed. The defence further claimed that the reliability of the reports could not be believed, as possibly headquarters did not have a map with which to check the locations. Now, if I've understood this argument correctly, this means that as there was no additional check on the place where the killings had taken place, then the location of the murder had to be doubted, and thus the murder itself. Then it said that if the reports are assumed to be correct, it was argued that Blobel was under the jurisdiction of the army, coming directly under the orders of Field Marshal von Reichenau of the 6th Army. Therefore, Blobel's defense tried the superior orders excuse that had already been rejected in war crimes trials. Blobel also claimed that the persons executed by his commander were investigated and tried, and that Field Marshal von Reichenau had reviewed every single case. Therefore, to take Babi Yar as an example, Blobel was claiming that 33,771 Jews were executed in 2 days immediately after explosions and incendiary fires for which they had all been found guilty of starting. As far as Babi Yar was concerned, Blobel claimed that not more than half of the mentioned figure was shot. So it seems that it was not 33,771, but something just under 17,000. Once more, as though that made everything all right. Blobel also claimed that his shootings were done in accordance with international law. He testified, executions of agents, partisans, saboteurs, suspicious people indulging in espionage and sabotage, and those who were of a detrimental effect to the German army were, in my opinion, completely in accordance with the Hague Convention. Blobel might not have been altogether aware of the law if he were of the opinion that he could execute people merely on suspicion. 16 separate reports directly implicated Blobel's commando in mass murder, many of them referring to him by name. The report of the 9th of November 1941 stated that Sonderkommando 4A had executed 37,243 people. Report number 132, dated the 12th of November 1941, tells of the execution of Jews and prisoners of war by Blobel's Sonderkommando. The report closes on the note, the number of executions carried out by Sonderkommando 4A has increased to 55,432. Report number 156 declares that as of the 30th of November 1941, Sonderkommando 4A had shot 59,018 persons. In his final plea for the defendant, defense counsel for Blobel explained his background. In 1924, Blobel began the practice of his profession, that is, of freelance architect. By untiring efforts he became successful, and at last he realized the dream of owning his own home. Then came the economic crisis of 1929. The solid existence for which he had fought and worked was smashed by the general economic collapse. He could get no new orders. His savings disappeared and he couldn't pay the mortgage on his house. The defense claimed that by then Blobel was down to his last shirt. According to Blobel, this explained his later behavior in going to the Soviet Union to slay tens of thousands of human beings. Blobel joined the SA, SS and the National Socialist German Workers' Party, not because he believed in the ideology of National Socialism, but to improve his economic situation. In 1935 he received an order as an architect to furnish the office of the SS in Dusseldorf. Despite the miraculous prosperity promised by National Socialism, in 1935 Blobel was still very poor, and so he thus decided to take up Nazi work seriously in order to get clothes again. He would give his entire time to National Socialism. He was now working for the SD, gathering intelligence. During the trial, Blobel claimed that he'd attempted to leave the SD prior to the outbreak of World War II, whilst also saying that up to 1939 there was no reason to leave the SD and to turn his back on this organisation. In June 1941, Blobel was called from Dusseldorf to Berlin, took charge of Sonderkommando 4A and marched into Russia. The court heard that in one operation his commando killed so many people that it could collect 137 trucks full of the property of the victims. Blobel's attitude on murder in general was well exemplified by his reaction to the question as to whether he believed that the killing of 1,160 Jews in retaliation for the killing of 10 German soldiers was justified. His words were, 116 Jews for one German? I don't know. I'm not a military person, you see. One can only judge it from a sort of public sentiment and from one's own human ideas. If they are enemies, and if they are equal enemies, the question would have to be discussed whether 1 to 116 is a justified ratio of retaliation. Blobel was found guilty under count 1, crimes against humanity, that is to say mass murder, and under count 2 of the indictment, war crimes, that is to say the needless destruction not justified by military necessity. The tribunal also found that Blobel was a member of the SS and SD under the conditions defined by the judgment and the International Military Tribunal, and was therefore guilty under count 3 of the indictment. On the 10th of April 1948, he was sentenced to death. Of the original 24 defendants in the Einsatzgruppen trial, 13 received a death sentence. These 13 were now to face a long stay on death row.